And we're a few minutes early, so we'll just wait till a few minutes after 5:30, and give folks a few minutes to come on in. But we're really glad that you came on the first snow of the year to come hang out with us. So thank you so much. Okay, everyone, so we'll get started. And if people come in, we'll be happy to just let them come on in and join us. Um, I'll have this up at multiple times of the day. So, but before I take it down and go to the next slide, this is our sign-in sheet, and we will make sure that once you put your information in here, that you get all of the slides that we use today, as well as a recording of the presentation, so that you can have access to it later, and so that you can share with anybody who couldn't make it. So I'm Arionne Nettles. I am a lecturer and the director of audio journalism programming here at Medill. And this is our first collaboration, right? So this is our first kind of best of both worlds workshop where we are teaming up with the School of Communication Sound Design program to kind of talk about podcasting in a very encompassing way, right? Over here at Medill, we are really great at storytelling. That's what we do, right? We're great at telling amazing stories and lining stuff up and structure and writing and all that great stuff. And our friends over at Sound Design, they are amazing at making stuff sound so beautiful. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to kind of bring you both of those things today. And so I'm going to start off first before passing it over to my colleague, Troy Cruz. So, how do we find an idea, right? So that's the first big thing. So I know a lot of people here may have a podcast already, maybe one that you want to start or restart or relaunch, or this may be something that you're starting from scratch. But you want to think about a couple things. The first thing is being intentional, right? So you want to really spend some time thinking about the what and the who. So what do you really want to make, and who are you making it for? So it sounds really simple, sounds really kind of overarching, But that is something that sometimes we're just not specific enough about, right? So again, when we're thinking about the what, we want to get super specific. What do we want to accomplish with this podcast? Is this podcast something to inform people about? Are we educating someone? Are we entertaining someone, right? Are we kind of giving people, for example, information about something that's about to happen? Are we recapping something that has already happened, right? All of these are things that we want to be very clear about. Even if you're talking about sports, for example, it's a really different thing to talk about what you think is going to happen on game day compared to recapping what actually did, right? And what makes this distinctive from other similar podcasts? That's a really important question because a lot of times we all want to have a podcast, and that's great, right? Because I love audio, and I think that there is room in the audio world for all of us. But we want to make sure that as we're thinking about, what do we have that is unique to this podcast space, we want to think about what is going to be that distinctive thing, right? Maybe it's location. Maybe your podcast is really, really specific to a neighborhood or a side of town, right? Like maybe, yes, everybody has a podcast about arts and culture, but yours is really specific to Evanston, or yours is really specific to the south side of Chicago, or yours is very specific to something, right? Maybe yours is very age specific. Yes, everyone cares about music, but this is going to be really specific about this one type of genre for this age range, right? There's a lot of ways, but you want to know what is going to be that distinct thing. And also, why are we the right people to make this podcast? Sometimes we're not the right people to make the podcast, and not because we're not great, but think about it this way. When we talk about reporting or storytelling, a lot of times we may not have the foundational knowledge for it to be as easy as we want it to be, right? So if, let's say, you decide that you want to do a weekly podcast that talks about politics, do you have enough political background, right? Do you know enough to be able to really take that idea and make it come together every single week? Do you have the resources to make it come together every week, right? Is it just you, or is it you and your friends? Can you share production duties, right? Can you share reaching out to people for interviews? Or is it gonna be really just maybe one or two people and you're both really busy and you have a lot of responsibility and you're not sure if you're gonna be able to do it every single week, right? So thinking through the what also needs to encompass who you are and what makes sense for you, right? We talk a lot about audience expectations on the marketing side of things, right? And so when we're thinking about that, we want to make sure that whatever we say this podcast is going to be, that it's something we're able to stick to, right? And sometimes you might want to have a period of exploration, right? Maybe you spend a couple months just playing around before you figure out what you can do. But if I say I'm going to do a podcast every Friday, then my audience is going to start expecting a podcast every Friday. So if I can't do every Friday, I need to pick a different schedule. Maybe I decide that, you know what, based on what my capability is, I can't do every Friday. So I'm going to come up with a concept, and I'm going to do the first Friday of every month, and I'm going to make it like, around the movies that are coming out this month, and my podcast about film is going to come out on the first Friday, right? Now we've set up an expectation, we have a flow, we have a schedule, and I've created something that has an expectation. The who, right? This, again, is a really important part of it. So who would want or need this podcast? And really, how specific can I be with that, right? So one thing that when you think about certain podcasts that you really like, think about who you think they are targeting, right? So a lot of news podcasts that you listen to automatically target kind of what we used to call, I don't know if people even still call it that in news, but we used to talk a lot about like water cooler conversation, right? Because we used to talk about how at work, you're around the water cooler, and when people bring up certain things, you want to be a person who is knowledgeable about these things. So maybe a water cooler type podcast is for people who want to be knowledgeable, right? You want to wake up, you want to listen to it, and you want to be like, okay, cool, I'm ready. And so when I go to work, I can be like, yes, I heard about the bill that passed, or so, right? And you know how to talk about it, right? Now, that is a very specific thing. When you listen to certain things like NPR Politics, right? When they kind of launched that podcast, they were very specific. They wanted kind of like to target that millennial population who really wanted to know more about politics, but maybe didn't know as much, right? And so they were like, we want to skew a little bit lower, a little bit younger than our primary NPR audience. And, you know, that doesn't mean you're excluding other people, but you have a clear target of who you're talking to when you're making it, right? And where are our listeners when they listen, right? What are they doing? How are they feeling? And this is just a really traditional radio concept. So, of course, podcasts are on demand. So they're not the same as traditional radio, but if you think about radio, right? If you kind of, I don't know if y'all can, maybe not some of y'all, but if you can, right? If you think about maybe your youngest years of your parents taking you to school in the morning, right? Like I remember the shows on the radio that my mom listened to when she was taking me to elementary school, because it would be the same show during that drive time, right? So in radio, we talk a lot about drive time, right? So it's always what are going to be those key shows that play during drive time. If it's an NPR station, you have Morning Edition in the morning, and you have All Things Considered in the afternoon, right? That's just the kind of flagship shows that play. So you're always thinking about that. But even if it's a podcast, what are our people doing? Have you noticed that maybe sometimes in your podcast feed, some stuff is already in your feed when you wake up, and then some podcasts aren't in your feed until it's time for you to leave school or work or whatever, right? Well, think about it this way. The daily, when I wake up, is in my podcast feed because that is one of those water cooler conversation podcasts. It's for me to know early in the morning what has happened overnight. I should be ready for the day. Consider This from NPR doesn't come into my feed until late in the afternoon. That is for my drive time home, right? They are targeting me ending my day, wrapping up my day with this news, right? So again, what are your people doing when they're listening? And after listening, what will they talk about, right? Who will they share this episode with? What will they say, right? You always know that when you watch like a good TV show and you're like, has anybody seen this yet? Because I got to talk to somebody about this show, right? It just came out on Netflix at midnight, and I already watched it. I need somebody to watch this with me because I've already binged all the episodes, and I need to talk to y'all about it, right? So when people are eager, they are excited, they have listened to your episode, and they love it because we want them to love it, what are they going to say about it? Now, how will we structure it? So, again, we're talking about Medill, journalism side of things. We're going to talk about some structure. Structure is my favorite thing. So, flatline story is what we talk about most of the time. When we're listening to the radio and we hear kind of those short stories, what are just kind of like generally like those short spots, you know, that's pretty much generally a flatline story, right? So let's say, for example, you hear a story that is about people voting on election day. So the story is people voting on election day. That's the horizontal line. And the vertical lines are people commenting on that horizontal line. And it's just a person saying this, a person saying this, a person saying this. It's not bad, right? And it's fine for a minute, 45 seconds. But do you want to hear that for 15 minutes? No, it's not going to work out, right? And so critics feel like it technically has a beginning and an end, but it doesn't really give you a reason to keep listening. And we're always we want to make sure that when we leave here, that we're really thinking about how can I give people a reason to keep listening. So, story with the arc. This is familiar, right? This takes us back to elementary school English when we are learning about rising action and all that good stuff, right? And so this is, you want to think about this as maybe based on a question, and it's driving listeners through the story, something that they are curious about. It doesn't have to be discussed as a question, right? But maybe if you wanted to, you could rewrite this as something that people are wondering. And the thing about that is that you are promising something, right? That by the end of this thing, I'm gonna give you an answer. And so the biggest piece with this story arc is that I am selling this story at the stop, right? Think about when, and I think maybe TV people might think about some of this stuff already, but you really have to put a lot of your good stuff at the start because that's part of selling it. I have to intrigue you. I have to let you know that this is gonna be something great. And that is gonna be that reason for you to listen to the end that we didn't give you with the flatline structure. Divide it into acts. This is the same thing, but we're gonna have a little bit of movement. Have you ever been to a play and it was really, really long and you're like, why didn't we get an intermission? Right? You're like, it feels like I have been in this play for a very long time. I cannot believe they did not give us a break. Generally, things are divided into acts because it makes you feel like you're moving. When you see that act 1 moving to act 2, it makes you feel accomplished. Okay, we're moving, right? Something new is happening in a way that doesn't happen without those marks. So you are thinking about this same story, that very same arc. It's not a new story, but you're thinking about how can I break it up? Even if you're doing something different, beginning, middle, end, or 3 different places, right? I would even say a lot of your favorite interview-based shows may also have this, right? I think about It's Been a Minute, right? Even now, so we have a new host, Brittany Luce, but thinking back to, the new host, Brittany also has like a 3-act show, but I'm gonna think about Sam's show because I just remember his structure like the back of my hand. And so he always starts with like one guest that's talking a little bit about the news. That's like a act 1. The second one is like a different interview, and act 3 was like a game. So even if it's interview-based and not super, narrative in that way, we still have 3 sections, 3 segments, right? It's like when you're listening to live radio. There's always these segments a part of it. If you're listening to like WBEZ, if you're listening to the midday show, WBEZ Reset, every hour has 3 segments. There's an A segment, a B segment, and a C segment. Now, if something's really great, it may take up 2 segments, but there's always segments because they want you to feel like it's moving forward. And signposts. Signposts keep the audience from getting lost, right? And they tell them where you're going and why you are going there. And you can literally picture this like somebody holding up a sign telling you which way this story is gonna go, right? And I don't know about y'all, but think about when you are sending somebody, when you're telling somebody a story, right? If I'm telling somebody a story and, maybe it is like something that, maybe I'm gossiping, okay? Maybe I'm gossiping. Let me just be real. Maybe I'm gossiping about something I saw, okay? So think about this. I've seen something. I am calling up my best friend. I say, hey, best friend, let me tell you, did you hear that this person broke up with this person? Okay? But first, before we get to this story, I need to explain what happened last week at the so-and-so, right? So you have all these things where you are explaining to the person you're telling the story to where the story is gonna go, right? It explains when you have to like kind of go off and veer off a little bit, and you're explaining kind of the structure of this story that you're gonna say. So we naturally do these signposts when we're telling people stories. So they can break up this big question into smaller steps, right? Which is really, really key if you are doing a podcast that is investigating something curious, right? And, first we have to figure out. Or it can recap what we've learned this far, right? And help you raise new questions in the middle of the story. So we are going to listen to just the first 5 minutes of this story from NPR's Planet Money. And you don't have to write these down, but just think about all these signposts that you hear, because it's going to be a lot, right? But also think about what role you think that signpost plays, right? Like, is it summarizing? Is it like kind of leading us somewhere? But this is one of my favorite podcast episodes about signposting, or examples of it, rather. Let's refresh.
Because we do not often cover congressional hearings on this show because, I'll just say it, they can be a little boring. But yesterday there was a hearing that we here at Planet Money could not ignore.
We have an agreement already, limitation of 10 minutes on each side on opening comments. Without objections.
Because hanging in the balance was the fate of the U.S. $1 bill. The question, should we eliminate $1 bills and replace them with dollar coins? David Schweikert, congressman from Arizona, said yes, it's a no-brainer. Switching to coins would save money.
This is one of those issues that on the face should be almost blatantly simple. And I've been, so in many ways, on a personal level, almost heartbroken.
But David Miller, former director of the Office of Management and Budget, said no, do not replace $1 bills with coins. It won't save any money.
Proponents allege it would save money. Now let's look at that. Where would the claimed savings come from? It surely doesn't come from the tooth fairy.
Now, a lot of times in debates like this, you can't just say one side is right and the other side is wrong. There's usually some gray area, some place where you have to weigh the arguments and decide how you feel about the issue. But this is not one of those issues. We think there is one correct answer. Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm David Kestenbaum. As regular listeners may know, I got very interested in this question a while back, perhaps unreasonably obsessed with it, and we spent a long time trying to get to the bottom of things, and I think we did get to the bottom of things, and we did a show about it. So today, we are just going to replay that show for you. It's me and Jacob Goldstein. I should just let you know this is from April of 2012. I hope you like it. Dollar coins versus dollar bills. So right now, we have both of them, but as we've reported, lots of dollar coins are sitting unused in vaults. But maybe coins are a better option. Maybe we should just get rid of the dollar bill and force people to use coins.
And David, you and Robert Benincasa on NPR's investigative team, you've been digging into this. And I've actually heard you on the phone for a long time now talking to people about it. And based on those conversations, and I mean this, I think at this point you may know as much as anyone in America about this question.
Right. As we said, there does seem to be a right answer here. The debate on the surface, it's a practical one. What's easier? What's more convenient? But to get to our final verdict, we are going to need to go deep into the nature of money itself. Before we get there, let's hear from both sides. In one corner, arguing for coins, we have Senator Tom Harkin, Democrat from Iowa. His pitch involves a vending machine in the basement of some Senate building. At least that's where I think this video is shot.
Has this ever happened to you? You try to put a dollar bill in and it's wrinkled, it won't take it. Well, that's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation to replace the dollar bill with a dollar coin.
I talked to Senator Harkin, and vending machines aside, he says it's a no-brainer. Coins last a lot longer than bills.
The most important thing is that it's just more efficient. It's way more efficient than a paper dollar.
Dollar coins last something like 30 years. He says switching to coins would save hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And Harkin is ready with a long list of countries that have already made the switch. Europe has the euro with a coin worth more than $1. So do Japan and Australia.
Canada has a coin that's worth $2. England has a coin worth about $3 U.S. Switzerland has one worth about $5 U.S. And yet, what have we got? We got a 25-cent piece.
All right, so that's the argument in favor of coins. And it is not just Senator Harkin making the case. The Super Committee, remember, that was trying to cut the deficit? Super Committee was considering switching to dollar coins. The Washington Post just wrote an editorial favoring coins. And in the Senate, Harkin has a very powerful co-sponsor, John McCain, the Republican from Arizona.
And just for the sake of thoroughness here, we should point out that both Harkin and McCain come from states with businesses that would benefit if this bill passes. McCain's state of Arizona, it's the largest producer in the country of copper, which is the main ingredient in dollar coins. There are big mining companies working in Arizona. And then Iowa, Harkin's state, it's home to a company called PMX, which makes the metal sheets that get turned into coins.
Harkin says he supported the dollar coin before PMX got into the business. McCain wouldn't talk to us for the story.
Just to recap the arguments on the pro-coin side, point 1, vending machines. Point 2, they last longer and will save a bunch of money. Point 3, lots of other countries are doing it. Now, let's hear from the paper people.
All right, in the other corner, fighting for paper, meet Douglas Crane. And I will say he has a strong financial interest here also. He is vice president at Crane & Company, which makes the very paper that the U.S. $1 bill is printed on.
A dollar bill is made from a blend of cotton and linen fiber.
That's surprising to me. I never knew that, It's almost like it's a T-shirt or something.
Well, it is. And, these textile fibers happen to make extremely strong and extraordinarily durable paper.
Doug Crane is not a fan of coins. He told me he was buying a train ticket from a machine recently, and he got change in dollar coins.
I was just crestfallen when I started hearing the clunking of the change coming down through the machine. It really wasn't a good feeling.
Doug's company has spent...
Okay, so we hear from our crestfallen friend here, but what signpost did you hear? Just what you think you heard. Anybody? Mm-hmm. Yes, that's absolutely a signpost. And now let's hear from the pro-coin side. Let's hear from the paper people. Those are all signposts. Anything else? Mm-hmm.
I think at the very beginning when they brought up something's being discussed in Congress now, but here's this story from, whenever that was relevant, to what's going on now.
Yes. So talking about what is happening in Congress now, I'm just repeating for the recording. But this is the story that we're talking about, right? Explaining to our audience why are we talking about Congress? Because you're thinking, well, this is Planet Money, and we normally don't talk about Congress, right? Anything else? Okay. So here are some that you can think about when you're thinking about what could help you transition in your writing, right? And we're gonna talk more about script writing before I pass it over. Explanation of motivation behind the story, right? And that's kind of about that Congress part too. We don't often cover this, but we could not ignore this, right? So we're saying why we're even doing this story. Clear statement of the episode's driving question. If you are a Medill student, it's one of those things when we're always talking about the why, right? Should we eliminate dollar bills and replace them with dollar coins? But also a little guidance for what's to come. Because essentially when we're writing scripts, we're kind of guessing what our audience is gonna wanna know before they are gonna wanna know it, right? So we know that people are gonna be like, well, I don't know, should we? And the answer is, well, we think there is one correct answer, but you gotta keep listening because we're not gonna tell you yet, right? So now we've made a promise and we have not told you the answer. And also, I'm not gonna lie, because I play this so much, I don't remember what the answer is because I usually just stop right here, right? Articulation of a bigger theme. To get to our final verdict, we are going to need to go deep into the nature of money itself, right? Ooh, right? What does that mean? Introduction of the characters, right? Like we heard. Let's hear from both sides. In one corner, arguing for coins, we have Senator Tom Harkin. And also, I would say this is a very clear example of how generally in more formal writing, you wouldn't say it that way. You wouldn't kind of paint this picture of a boxing ring, but in audio, we want to be more conversational, right? So it's okay to use some colloquialisms, right, if they are things that perhaps you would actually say if you were in conversation with someone. and summary, right? Because there's going to be a lot of pieces. So before we move to the next piece, to the next act, we're going to say, just to recap the arguments on the pro-coin side, right? So now we're remembering, we're fresh, that argument is fresh in our minds before we move to the next argument. And transition. Now let's hear from the paper people. But how do we write this, right? How would we write something like this? Or something like maybe what you would want to do. So let's think about what it's like when you are listening, because it's different than when you're reading. So the first thing is you can't control the pace of the story. There's not an opportunity to slow down or rewind. Now, technically, that is true in radio. In podcasting, you kind of can rewind and fast forward, but you know it's irritating. You have to go up 15 seconds, back 15 seconds, you went back, you didn't go back far enough, you hit it again, you went back too far, now you got to listen to stuff again. It's not an easy thing, right? So a lot of times, think about how many times you miss something and you're just like, that's fine, it wasn't that important, I don't have to get it, it's totally okay, right? So you want to write this as if your audience can't do it, right? Or also, you know, one thing that is big as people are thinking more and more about the future of audio is, you know, really a lot of people are trying to, and when I say people, I really mean radio stations, they want more and more people to really get used to listening to their radio stations and to their programming and to their podcasts on smart speakers. Like, have you ever heard an ad where they're like, ask your smart speaker to play whatever? So especially imagine that, right? Somebody's in the kitchen doing dishes, right? And the smart speaker is on. They literally may not be able to rewind that, right? So think about that opportunity. So audio storytelling, again, it's linear, right? You want to make sure that things are feeling like it's moving forward. And even if we are playing around with time sometimes, that just means we need to do a lot more signposting. So it doesn't mean that you can't go back and tell the history of something after you have been in the present, but we just got to be clear. We can't maybe jump around and make inferences that our audience can follow. Have you ever read a book that kind of, where every other chapter is like maybe in a different time period, and as you read, you just are like, oh, okay, we're back in the past. Oh, okay, we're back in the future. And you just get it, right? But in audio, we can't really do that. We need to let people know clearly before, like where we're going before we get there. And also, you can forget a lot of names and titles, right? So when we're reading something, it's different, but when we are hearing it, it's just not the same. So if I talk to somebody and I introduce their voice and then I go away from them, I need to kind of reintroduce them, right? I need to keep titles short. So when I started and I said, hi, I'm Arionne, and I am a lecturer and the director of audio journalism programming here at Medill, that's just too much, right? You can't put that in an audio story. You have to say, Arionne Nettles is a lecturer at Medill, period. She works on audio programming, period, right? You can't have all that because people, as they are listening, and even if they want to understand all that, it's just going to be too much for the ear. And too many numbers are confusing, right? So how can we make numbers in our podcast make a little bit more sense? So if, let's say, something is 32%, we'd say about a third, right? 45%, a little less than half. I had a student one time who was working on like increase in drinking during the pandemic for young people. And so let's say if a statistic says that drinking increased however much percentage, but what does that mean to the average person? Like, do you even know how to translate that? But if you say, well, the average adult used to drink 2 glasses of wine a week, but during the pandemic, they increased to 4, now I am very clear on what that means. I understand as a listener. I can visualize it. I understand it, right? And sometimes, though, we are dealing with numbers where we got to be real technical, right? Because a lot of us are journalism people, or we might be doing really tough things. And I use the example a lot of crime rates. Crime rates are really specific things where we can't just round it up. But in those cases, we just might need to do a little bit of explaining, right? the way this crime rate means that for every 100 people, blah, 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 right? But we want to be very careful with numbers. We can't just throw our numbers in the way we do with written work. And the biggest thing, if you don't remember anything else, is that sentences that work in print just make for bad radio. You want them to be short, you want them to be quick, and you want some pauses. And honestly, the biggest thing that you notice that will tell you when your sentences are way too long is when you're trying to read them and you're getting out of breath. That's how you know. But as I said, I love some good, juicy gossip, right? Gossip is my favorite thing. And so when you go back in your mind, right, in your heart, think about when you're telling somebody your favorite story. You know, I'm assuming that probably everybody here is one of those people. You are one of those people that people go to for information, or you go to say, hey, tell them about what happened. Tell them that funny story about when we went to whatever last week, right? You are that person. And so what makes a good, juicy story, right? Whether it's gossip or a TV show or any of the things that you love, right? It's conversational. You are unrolling that information really slowly. You are not trying to put every single thing in one sentence. And I know that is the opposite of what we teach you when you start journalism school. We tell you, try to get the who, what, when, where, why, and how in that first sentence, in the lead. And I'm sorry, but you gotta unlearn all of that when you start doing audio stuff, because you really need like one fact per sentence instead of all of those facts in one sentence. And you want it to be easy to understand. Again, short sentences, attribution in the front, how we would, talk normally, or broadcast style for anybody who does TV. So instead of saying the so-and-so happened, comma, authorities said, you would say authorities say blah, 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 right? Attribution in the front. And be real, okay? I think the biggest thing that I can say, and in all of my classes, I have a whole lesson on like being yourself, using your own voice, not trying to change for somebody else, but like use the words that you would use, because if you don't use the words that you would use, it's gonna trip you up, it's not gonna sound good, and it's really just gonna be like not worth it. So I was working on a story maybe like a couple months ago, and I think one of the producers I was working with changed a line in a story, and I didn't really like the story, but the line, but I was just ready to be done. Like we had been doing a lot of edits. I just wanted to be done. You know how you just want to wrap something, and I just was accepting it. And then when I read it, when we were tracking it or like reading the narration, I was reading it, and everybody was like, that doesn't sound good. And I was like, I kind of snapped. I was like, I know, because I didn't write it. And it was my fault, because I should have clearly just not accepted the change, right? Like, I could have easily said, that's what I know better. But I was just like, whatever. But I knew that's not something that I would say, and I should have changed it. So here's the thing, though, because I know that we have talked about a lot of stuff, and a lot of it really does maybe make the biggest impact on like really heavily narrated stuff. But I think that even if you want to do kind of these interview-based podcasts, which I know a lot of people already have, you still need a script. And that's the thing, right? And so I want to just talk for a second about how to pull in all these ideas regardless of the type of podcast you have, right? Even if it is a sports podcast where you want to break down the plays, right? Like, you still need a script. And honestly, pretty much almost everything you listen to that's the good stuff is scripted. They just make it sound like it's not scripted. Like, that's the best part, is that when you get good at it, it doesn't sound like you're reading from a script, but everybody is reading from a script. That's the key, right? And that is what makes it interesting and good and gets rid of a lot of the fluff, right? Have you ever listened to a podcast and, I know I do, because I'm not loyal, so I just turn them off. But you listen to a podcast and you're like, this is so boring. Like, what have they been talking about for the past 5 minutes, right? You know, you're talking to your friend, and they're like, hey, I started a new podcast. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to listen and support you. And you're listening, and you're like, I cannot get through this, right? A lot of times it's because they didn't make those hard cuts. The same way you have to edit yourself in writing, right? Even if you were writing like a blog, not even like a journalism article, anything you write, you got to edit, right? Even if you're editing yourself, you got to edit your audio pieces, right? And a script helps you so that you're closer to what you want to be, and then you have less stuff to edit on the back end. And so your script will have like at least like your intro and outro, right? You will have all of the transitions. So when you're listening and they're like, we'll be right back, that's in the script. You know, all of those things. Hey, we're back, and we're here with so-and-so. That's in the script. That's so they don't forget to say it. Like, they're not going to remember all that stuff, right? All of those things, all of those transitions are in a script. Questions for the interviewee. You are not just spitballing. You have a list of specific and well-researched questions, right, that you are going to pull from and use in this interview. And any tape that's played, right? So let's say if I'm interviewing a singer and I want to play a clip from a performance, right, for her. If you're listening even to a live show, you might hear somebody say, hold on, we have a clip of that. Let's play it for a second, right? You have all of that inside this script, and directions or ideas for the producer. So if, let's say you want to tell your producer you want something to blend under something or play under something, a lot of those directions are in a script. So a lot of times people will have a prep doc that has a bunch of notes, right? The notes might be like, okay, this is the person we're interviewing. This is the date of the interview. It might have like the place and the time, more questions than what you even need, background quotes. Let's say you're pulling from some really great interviews and you're like, okay, we want to follow up on this thing they said in an interview with Vogue, whatever. You pull in all that type of stuff in a prep doc. Then you pull from the prep doc into your script. So this is I don't know, maybe I did this 3-4 years ago, but I guest hosted WBEZ's, well, guest co-hosted WBEZ's Nerdette, and this is just like a sample, and Nerdette is an interview-based podcast, right? So it's not like the more narrative documentary style. This is interview-based, and so you see the intro. This part is scripted. And then we just say, hey, let's talk about how we work together, love each other, because we're friends, right? So we're not scripting that part, but we have a note there so that it can feel natural. You don't have to script every single word, but we're giving ourselves a guide. Then a music bumper, right? See, a note for the producer. Nerdette is a show where you talk to your favorite, whatever. Any pronouncers for the people that you're interviewing, or the names of like shows or anything, pretty much anything that you got to repeat, add a pronouncer. Even if you think that you know how to pronounce it already, you never know when you're like in front of a mic, you can just like make a mistake. You ever like watch an award show or something and somebody is like announcing the name of somebody, and you're like, you know how to say Beyonce, but it's like, it's something probably that's like the lights and the so-and-so, and it's like you kind of stumble. So a pronouncer just helps you remember. And so again, we have bullet points of what we want to bring up. We're not like reading this verbatim, but if I'm reading this, I'll say, so, black girl, it really started as an inside joke, right? And then, Gloria made T-shirts, and it started as an Instagram account, and that Instagram account grew into a book club, right? I don't even remember what we said. This was like 4 years ago, but you see how I have these bullet points, and I'm using the bullet points to pull from, to say, or to do whatever my narration is, right? Into B, right? Into the B segment, interview part 1, notes, breaks, music bumper, end credits, this show is produced, our intern is, pickups is just like if, let's say, let's say generally you would want to have like someone that's with you, like your producer that's listening for stuff that sounds bad. So let's say I'm doing something and my voice kind of goes out, or I stumble over something. At the end, my producer might just say, hey, I got a few pickups, and it's just me repeating the things I messed up a little bit. It shouldn't be a lot. I took a group of students last year to a live taping of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And at the end, they're like, hey, can everybody stay for a second? And we just got to do some pickups, right? And then they just read stuff from throughout the show where they might have messed up and they got to reread it. And so that just shows that even a live show or something that seems like it's really low effort, it's a lot of effort. So this is just kind of like an example. You got any promos, anything you have to read is all in this. So this is an example of a script, right? It's not very, very scripted word for word, but there are certain parts that are word for word, and there are certain parts where there's like a lot of leeway because it's more of a discussion. And then after it's done, you're still gonna edit, you're still gonna cut it down, you're gonna do some like less stuff, you're gonna make it shorter and make it tighter. And it's okay to cut stuff down and make it good. That's what makes stuff good and not dull and not boring, right? And so just some things that I want to leave you with before I pass it over is that know your idea, right? What are you making and who are you making it for, right? You want to be really clear. No ambiguity there. Find your unique offering. What is it that you bring to this podcast, right? Are you really funny? Are you really knowledgeable? Like, what is it, right? And bring you and your personality, because maybe somebody else is doing it, but they're not you. So bring you. What is the you that you can infuse into this project? Structure, right? Edit down to the good stuff. Cut all that other stuff out. I know you might like some other stuff. You know, in journalism we say a lot, kill your darlings. You gotta kill it, right? There is a book that's really good about podcasts, and the chapter about editing is called Your Baby's Ugly, because you gotta cut, okay? You gotta cut stuff up. But and those are hard decisions, right? But you have to make those hard decisions and stick to it, and let your structure help keep it interesting. That is what is gonna help you stand out from all of the non-edited podcasts out there that don't know how to do it like you do it. And always have your script, write how you talk. Don't let anybody else try to change how you talk for your script and for your podcast, and just really use short sentences, okay? Don't get tripped up trying to be too flowery and too beautiful. It happens to all of us. It's gonna happen to you, but just try not to let it happen. Are there any questions before I pass it over? Okay, thank you so much. I'm gonna pause right here, and while we're switching it over, again, for people who might have come in a little bit later, this QR code is just a sign-in, and it just is so that after we can send you all of the slides and a link to the recording so that you'll have it, and you can have it to share if you'd like. Thank you so much, y'all. Next up, Troy Cruz.
Hello? Can you hear me through the speakers? Awesome. Cool. So that was a great presentation. I'm going to basically, my part of it is going to be, okay, after you've done all of that, what do you do next, as in terms of like opening software, how to go about starting to edit audio down or interviews down, the parts and the things to keep in mind, common like things that people make mistakes on in the beginning, and things like that. So before I start, I want to also just test that my sound is working in here, because I know that I may have to reopen this. So just bear with me. And while I'm doing this, I'll just talk a little bit about who I am and my background. So I am a freelance audio engineer at this point. I teach in the RTVF department. I teach film sound, specifically like production sound, on-set recording, but we also go into a little bit of post-production and mixing. I also TA the sound department, and I TA like the intro to production courses, the advanced recording courses, things like that. And then I also am a live sound engineer, so I do live sound at the MCA, a music venue. I do on-set film recording, and then post-production for film. So I edit dialogue for film, compose music for film, sound design, all of those things. And on top of that, I also work on podcasts. So I work on 3 podcasts right now. One of them is for a law firm, and it's just a basic, like, it's a podcast about how to be a paralegal, pretty much. It's very interesting, coming from someone who's not a paralegal. I also work on a podcast for a cybersecurity company, and that's like an internal podcast where they do webinars or interviews with multiple people that they want to edit down to be distributed to the company for internal use. And then I also was working on a podcast that was out of Northwestern, out of the communications department, that was for the International Communication Association. That was another like academic podcast where it's, interviews of leaders in the field that gets turned from like hour-and-a-half long interviews down to 20-minute to 25-minute episodes. That's a lot of editing down. Okay, that's working. And then I also work on some more scripted podcasts, which have a lot more sound design and music and are more like, bridging the edge between podcasts and audio drama. I mean, there's kind of a fine line anyway, but so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to show you a session at the end that is of an audio or of a podcast that is like fully fledged, done, and everything. But first, I'm going to start this presentation. Also, if at any point I say something that is confusing, just raise your hand, and I will hopefully clarify. All right, so here we go. So just an overview of what we're talking about today. We're going to talk a little bit about how to record properly, or just some good, techniques. A little bit of some useful resources, workflow, and this is specifically workflow for like having an interview or a recording, and how do you go about like organizing that and editing it down, how to keep your files organized and your editing software sessions organized, because as soon as you get disorganized, things like go off the rails, and it's not fun, and it's hard to get to that point and then come back. So having like this organization kind of at the forefront of your mind when you're going into this is really important. And then we'll go over a little bit about mixing and some like really common editing techniques like EQ, things like that. So just like for thinking about sound and parts of a podcast, it totally depends on the type of podcast you're making. But a lot of time there is some sort of intro or outro music that's either composed by somebody else or you get it from somewhere. Sometimes there's like a stinger, which is like a sound that is the same at the beginning of every single episode that like okay, I'm listening to this podcast or something like that. Underscoring is kind of the term that's used for putting like very quiet music underneath people speaking. A lot of times that's, maybe there's an interview and then once it goes to narration, under the narration there's like music just to kind of like transition to that section, and you kind of like understand that you're, okay, now we're into like this narration after we just finished talking to this person, something like that. The sound effects and ambience can include so many things, like so many things. And by ambience, I'm meaning more like if you say you were doing a podcast that's scripted and there's a scene that's in like a bar and you want to have like the sound of a bar in the background. That's kind of what I mean by ambience. And sound effects, I'm meaning more like actual like sounds, like if there's like a door slamming, you know what I mean? But there's so many things that could be in here. The last thing, of course, is a dialogue. I mean, unless you're doing a very, very experimental podcast with no speaking, there's going to be dialogue. And out of all of these things, that is the most important part of your podcast and the thing that you should focus on, learning how to edit the best first, because everything else is kind of secondary to your dialogue. Cool. So for recording, the first thing, which kind of seems very, common sense, but isn't always the case, is just think about where you're going to record it, especially if you're doing it on your own. Don't record it in the middle of a church or something like that. I don't know why you'd be in a church, but don't record it if you can possibly. Don't be close to a wall is a very important thing, especially a wall that has no absorption on it. Because what happens is when I'm speaking, like my voice is going like this, right? And if the mic is in front of me and I'm next to a wall, say this is going to be the wall. If I'm next to a wall, I'm going to crouch down and I talk, it can bounce off this and come back into the mic. And if that happens, the sound that comes off of the thing and back into the mic is going to be a little bit delayed from the voice that's going right into it. And then frequencies actually start canceling itself out, and it sounds bad, pretty bad. So that's one thing to really think about that is not really like on the forefront of people's minds initially, but also very important. Another thing that seems like common sense, but is good to mention, is just to be close to the microphone. The closer you are, generally the better it sounds. Mics have something called the proximity effect, which essentially means the closer you get to it, the more like oomph and like bass is going to come through the mic. Of course, that can be a negative too. If you're too close, then it just sounds super, super bassy. And that's part of why we get plosives in the first place. So plosives are like when someone says like a B or a P and it goes like on the mic. And essentially what it is the air of your like mouth is blowing into the mic capsule, and it creates very much a lot of bass. And usually that's not a good idea, or usually it's not something we want to keep. And in audio land, there's like a saying which basically is you should be recording or like scripting as if there was going to be no post-production. So you should be trying to get the best recording, the best like sounding everything at the recording stage and not rely on the post because you can't always fix all the problems that you think you can fix when you're recording. And one thing for a plosive that's just easy to do is instead of putting a mic like directly in front of you, you can just move it like right here. And it'll still sound great, but when you make those B or P sounds, it'll go past the mic and you won't get those types of things. That also helps with sibilance, which is like the S's, sounds. If the mic comes a little bit off to the side, then it's not as intense. And of course, there's ways to fix this in post, but again, we don't want to think like that when we're recording. Another thing that's, just if there's multiple people, ideally you want them on a different mic. If they're going to be on the same mic, that's totally okay. You just want to make sure that they're aware that you don't want to be talking over each other, because in post it's really hard to remove someone else's voice from another voice that's like baked into a single recording. And the last thing I'll say is when we're working on computers in digital audio land, we have something called a sample rate and a bit depth. And the sample rate is essentially like frame rate in film, right? So in film, there's usually 24 frames a second. So the camera's like taking a picture every 24 frames, or taking a picture 24 times a second, right? In audio land, we take pictures of the audio 48,000 times a second, or 44,000 times a second. And then bit depth is basically for every single picture that we take of the audio, we have to assign it a binary number. Usually we work in 24-bit, which is a lot of numbers. That's a lot of numbers per audio sample. So the higher the bit depth just means that each snapshot can have a bigger number, which makes it more accurate in terms of like its dynamic range. And then the sample rate helps us pick up all the frequencies in our audible spectrum. There's something in audio called the Nyquist theorem, which basically states, it's actually a physics theorem, but it basically states that for any waveform to be accurately represented, it has to be captured at 2 times the frequency. So if we want to represent a 1,000 hertz wave, our sample rate has to be at least 2,000. So for our hearing, we hear, the max that we hear is 20,000 kilohertz, right? That's like the average human hearing, even though most people in the world don't hear that high anyway. So anything over 40,000 kind of captures all of that audible hearing range. So 48,000 kilohertz and 24-bit is kind of a standard we're working with audio. On music, it's a little bit different, where they work more with 44.1. But the main point about this is that you have to keep these consistent through your programs. Like if you're, because there's so many different audio programs, there's things like Descript, which is a transcription program where it takes your audio, makes a transcription of it, and you can edit the audio. We'll talk more about that soon, but, and you can render audio files out. But when you go to render something, it asks you for like a sample rate and a bit depth. Or when I make a Pro Tools session, it asks me what I want my sample rate to be and my bit depth. Or if I go to Audition or Premiere, and as soon as you start having differences and you don't convert them, if I have a 44.1 sample rate thing and I play it back at 48,000, the timings are different and it might sound sped up, basically, or slowed down. And we don't want that. So keeping in mind at the beginning, and this is also in the recording stage. Like if you record on your phone, you can set usually the sample rate and the bit depth. But keeping this stuff consistent across all the programs is going to make your life a lot easier, because sometimes you'll bring something in and it'll sound like it's sped up and you won't understand why. And if you go from 24-bit to 16-bit, you just lost all of that extra data basically in your file. You can't go back from 16-bit to 24-bit. You've lost all of it. So ideally, it's good to keep it all there. So this is probably the most important thing I will say, that if you remember one thing from this entire talk, it'll be this, is that no matter how good your podcast sounds, like all this stuff, if your content is bad, no one's going to listen to it, really, is the thing. There is kind of like a fallacy in audio where people feel like they need like the best mics or the best computer speakers, and they have to know how to do compression and EQ really well, and they focus on learning all that, which is great, but that takes away a lot of the time, especially at the beginning, in just learning how to make good content that people will listen to. There are so many like things I've listened to, even like just on YouTube videos, that people have horrible audio, but like I'm so engaged in it because I'm just like curious and like interested in what they're doing. And then as time, since you're continuing to edit your own stuff, you get better at the technical side. Like there's no question, you just get better at it by doing it. So like just don't focus on like, oh, my podcast is bad because I don't have a nice mic. Like it's okay, totally okay. So these are some useful resources for like music and sound effects. Freesound is like the OG, There's like a bunch of free sounds that people just upload, and they're free to download, and most of them are free to use. There are some restrictions on like the copyright, which you have to look in the little thing. As long as you're not like using it commercially, usually it's okay. And then some paid resources like Soundstripe, Storyblocks, and Epidemic Sound. They just have just so many, it's basically like stock photos, but for audio. And you can get music, sound effects, like whole like intro sections. And it's nice when you're starting. Eventually, if you were making your own podcast, you would make your own. But it doesn't mean that you can't use other people's like stock things for your stuff. That's kind of another fallacy in audio. Like you have to make everything yourself. And that's not true. And even like in big budget films, they have libraries. They're not making every single sound effect. They're pulling from libraries of things that other people have made. Cool. So now I just want to talk a little bit about like how I go through my workflow when I am given an interview that I am tasked with editing down. I also just kind of want to say that I am on the side of like audio where I am purely like an engineer. And what I mean by that is I have never made my own podcast, but I have edited 20 podcasts. You know what I mean? Like I am the person that people will come to help them edit their podcast. So the editing side is really like my strong suit and what I have the most experience in. And this is going to be like just a little bit of like an overview of how I go about doing it. And this is just what I've learned along the way. The quickest way, not doing steps twice or getting like off track, what to do first, what to like put off at the end. But basically, say I'm given like an interview that I'm supposed to do it. My first pass, if I'm not using Descript, which I was mentioning is like a transcription software, which is amazing if you want to edit your audio by reading it instead of just listening to it. Descript lets you do that, and you can also like wherever you click like say you get a transcript and then you click in the middle of it, it'll start playing the audio from that section, and you can like move things around. It's very useful, but for me, that doesn't work for me. I like having it in the session the whole time. So my first pass is I'll just listen to it straight through, and I will start making notes about what people are talking about at what time. Sometimes I'll make notes like, oh, we don't need this. This can go away. Or, oh, this might sound good at the beginning of the episode instead of at the end, things like that. And then the second pass is when you start cutting things. Like, okay, you've listened to it once, so you're reminded, if you were the interviewer, you're reminded about the whole interview, you have the whole thing fresh in your mind, so you kind of like have an idea of what the story could be in that interview. Because if you start making cuts right when you start listening the first time, you may not remember what they talked about 10 minutes from now. So it's good to listen to it first all the way through without changing anything. And then that kind of like gives you some thoughts going forward. So second pass, start cutting it. And then you put all the things you cut together, like you smash them together so they're playing in sequence. And then that's when you really start the editing. Like, if you want to start editing the voices or listening to it, make sure it sounds like good and not weird that you moved pieces around. Removing distractions, and that kind of means like if people go like that or something, hit their mic, or they sneeze or something, I don't know, just things like that. If there's an air conditioning machine running that you don't want to have, you can do some noise reduction and things like that. So for the mixing side, before we actually start opening Pro Tools, the most important thing in pretty much all of audio land is that your levels are consistent and overall level is good. And when I say consistent, I don't mean that there's no louds and softs. What I really mean is that if someone is listening to your podcast, you don't want them to ever have to turn the volume up or down at any point. So you can have loud things and soft things for dramatic movements and transitions. But if your loud thing is so loud that the listener turns it down, and then when it gets quiet, they have to turn it back up, you kind of messed up as an audio editor. So you can still have these differences in levels. You just want to make sure that the loud stuff isn't so loud that it's hurting people's ears, and the quiet stuff is not so quiet that they can't hear it. And this just kind of comes with practice and doing it. And then another really important thing is monitoring level versus at the actual level. So in digital land as well, we have volume knobs. Like on our phone, we can turn things up and down. And on a computer, we turn this up and down. And this affects the volume that we're hearing our audio softwares at if you're not using outboard equipment to listen to things. So even audio interfaces, they have a dial on it, right? And a common mistake that I have seen people do is that they will, instead of getting a good level within the software, they'll turn their volume up loud so they can hear it, and then they think that they're editing at a good level. But it's really like a facade or like an illusion. So and then they go to export their audio, and it's 30 times quieter than everybody else's audio. You know what I mean? And that's because they didn't set up their gain stages of their equipment correctly at the beginning. And once I open Pro Tools, I will talk about this and what I mean. But that's very, very important. And then a few other things that we'll get to is the most common things, especially for voice, are EQ, which equalization, compression, and sometimes gates are used. And EQ affects the tone. You can kind of shape a sound to sound more like how you want it to. You can remove, if someone's voice is super bassy, right? You can remove some of that bass so it's not blowing people's subwoofers in their car when they're speaking, because that's not fun usually. Or say they're using a certain mic that's picking up a frequency that sounds too crunchy, staticky. You can use EQ to kind of remove that a little bit and just make it sound more flush. And that again just comes with practice. You just got to do it, learn it, and do it. Open EQs on things, move them, and listen to how it affects it. For all of this stuff in audio editing, the best way to learn is to just try to essentially copy a professionally made podcast. So if they're for the NPR podcast, that, those people's voices sound amazing, right? So you could bring in that podcast into software and then try to like EQ your voice to sound like them. And that's really one of the most helpful ways to learn all of this stuff. And that also helps you with levels, because you're going to see like, oh, okay, this is how loud their voices is. This is how loud their voice is to the music, to the sound effects, and it's helpful. And then the last thing is crossfades. And a crossfade is basically when you butt up two audio files together that aren't like what you recorded, like you move something. Crossfade basically fades out the first one into the second one. And this is really, really important, because if you don't do this, then you have the potential for getting like clicks and pops in your audio. And the reason that that happens is because the waveforms go like up and down like this, and they're sampled by the sample rate. And if you start playing a sample not at like the beginning, because they go up and then below the line, then up and then below the line. If audio starts playing somewhere that's not right at the beginning, then it'll like pop. And crossfades ensure that does not happen. And it's just pretty much, that's all you have to worry about. Crossfade it, it's gonna be fine. And you won't have a pop. You may have to move the audio around to make it sound smooth, but you'll have no pops or clicks. And that's really important. Okay, so now I have a Pro Tools session. I just found this, I just found this interview on YouTube. I just pulled an interview to practice to do this. I had never heard it before. And this is like 2 minutes of an interview where someone is interviewing an audio engineer. And I think it'll be just useful to explain some of these concepts by just doing a quick edit of this. And then after this, I will show like a full-fledged session with multiple voices, sound effects, intros, outros, music, and everything. So let's see if this works.
Hey, sort of the
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just go through the steps that I had just described in real time, and hopefully it sounds good. we'll see. So this is Pro Tools, by the way. This is an audio software, a DAW, a digital audio workstation, that is commonly used, but there are so many other programs that aren't Pro Tools that are equally as good to use for podcasts. Reaper is a really big one. If you're not aware of Reaper, it's basically free. They ask you for $60, but you don't have to pay it. They just let you keep using it. And it's very, very widely used in the podcast world. I use Pro Tools because I'm used to it. I came from a music background, so Pro Tools is just like in my life already, and I'm very quick in it, so I like it. But it's totally up to you. There's no right way. If anyone tells you that there's a right way, then don't listen to them, because that's not true. So I'm just gonna play this, and I'm gonna go through these steps. I'm gonna make notes on a timeline, which Pro Tools lets you do, and I'm gonna put people on their own track if there's multiple people. So I'm just gonna make a new track, because I know there's an interviewer and an interviewee. So I'm just making a new track. I need my mouse. Here it is. Cool. So it's only 3 minutes long, so we'll just go through it. Maybe I'll stop halfway through. I don't know.
So how did you get started? What led you into the field of mastering?
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York, like everybody.
Sure.
And a friend of mine came in one night and said, I'm just making
see
the rounds around
up here,
town.
I'm making
Say,
notes.
Goodbye to everybody. I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And I sort of I remember very distinctly leaning down on the counter and looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you.
Yeah.
And I came out to California, got a job as a runner, gopher. I called it coffee engineer, and caught the eye of a mastering engineer at the studio I was working at, and he said, hey, sort of the classic, hey kid, you want a shot? And that was at Sony Music Studios.
Wow.
And it was pretty cool. I was 19. I knew almost nobody in Los Angeles, but I always played in bands. I'd always been in bands. I was sort of always like the guy in the band that ran the PA, And so I had a real interest in it. And my friend who was coming out was a drummer. And that sort of got me started. Once I got into a mastering room and I understood what mastering was, I realized the way that I heard music really fit in really well with that. So mixing sort of inside-out listening, mastering is much more sort of outside-in listening, and that sort of suits the way that I interpret and understand music. So while I'm an absolutely deplorable mixer, I'm a pretty fair mastering engineer.
So can you expand on that? What does that mean, inside-out listening versus outside-in listening?
I think when you're, what I call inside-out listening is when you're when you're in the mix environment, you have individual discrete control of everything. You've got a kick drum and a snare drum and a vocal and a guitar and a keyboard. And if you need the guitar louder, you just raise the guitar. If you need the guitar quieter, you lower the guitar. And your general concern is getting all the volumes of everything in relation to each other correct, and then placing them in stereo field. In mastering, I think of it as much more outside-in listening. I want to step back from that. I want to sort of view the music in total. And then I may dive in, and it's much more about balancing tones. So it's much more about make sure the vocal sits right against the overall music, maybe not just against the background vocals or against the guitar or something else. It's about overall sort of sonic things, and we're not generally using levels and panning. We're generally using EQ and compression to do that. And the other aspect of it is, if I need to go back to what we were talking about, if I need to raise or lower a guitar, I have to find a way to do that with EQ and compression without a fader. And there's a lot of technology out there today that will allow you to sort of not isolate, but sort of quasi-isolate things and almost remix certain portions of the song.
Right.
So in that sense, I think of it, as I said, outside-in listening, because I'm always referencing the whole. Anytime, even if I do dive into something and I'm trying to do something discrete or specific, I'm doing it to the whole, and by that I mean the whole mix. And I'm always referencing the whole mix. I'm always stepping back and saying, okay, how did what I do fit in with the overall sound?
Cool. Did everyone follow what I was doing while I was doing this? Just kind of like making notes as I was listening. And now that I've done that, I can literally just look at the top here. Hopefully you can read this because it's kind of tiny. It's kind of tiny. But so I just made all these notes, and they're just kind of like, in my head, moments that I thought were like he was kind of switching between either he was clarifying something or adding more information over something else. Things that I zoomed out so you can't see them, but you can see just things I thought were interesting and I thought they'd be useful. So now I'm going to do one more pass of this, but I'm going to start actually, now that I've heard the whole thing, I'm going to start actually making cuts in the audio of things that I think are useful. And I'm also going to mark out things I think that don't need to even be in the final thing. And I'm going to do this by making things different colors, essentially. And this kind of gets into like the subjective side, especially because I am not the interviewer. I'm going to be the editor. So I'm kind of making the decisions now of what to keep and what not to keep. And that may not be what the person who I'm doing this for wants. So if one of the big things before this ever happened is I would have had a meeting with the director about things that they thought would be useful. Because sometimes they'll give you a document, like the prep sheet, that has like, I want this, 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 this. I want a sound here and here and here. I want music here. But sometimes I'm just given an interview, and they're like, okay, go ahead. Both are equally as fun, though. So here we go. I'm gonna do another pass. I'm gonna start coloring things, and we'll see what happens. And I also put that other person's on their own track. The person who was interviewing. And I already remember that he asked this clarifying question, and I already know that I don't want that in there. I remember that from the first time, so I make that red. So here we go again.
So how did you get started? What led you into the field
You
of
want
mastering?
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York, like everybody.
Sure.
And a friend of mine came in one night and said, I'm just making the rounds around town. I want to say, goodbye to everybody. I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And so I'm
going to just listen again.
Mine came in one night and said, I'm just making the rounds around town. I want to say, goodbye to everybody. I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And I sort of I remember very distinctly leaning down on the counter and looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you.
Yeah.
And came out to California, got a job as a runner, gopher, I called it coffee engineer, and caught the eye of a mastering engineer at the studio I was working at, and he said, hey, sort of the classic, hey kid, you want a shot? And that was at Sony Music Studios.
Wow.
And it was pretty cool. I was 19. I knew almost nobody in Los Angeles, but I always played in bands. I'd always been in bands. I was sort of always like the guy in the band that ran the PA, And so I had a real interest in it. And my friend who was coming out was a drummer, and that sort of got me started. Once I got into a mastering room and I music studios.
Wow.
And
so I'm just gonna I'm deleting. I'm not gonna take any of this. Where he's talking about the drummer and the musician.
And that sort of got me started. Once I got into a mastering room and I understood what mastering was, I realized the way that I heard music really fit in really well with that. So mixing sort of inside-out listening, mastering is much more sort of outside-in listening, and that sort of suits the way that I interpret and understand music. So while I'm an absolutely deplorable mixer, I'm a pretty fair mastering engineer.
Don't need that.
So,
in my opinion,
can you expand on that? What does that mean? Inside out
we
listening
don't need
versus
this.
outside
He
in
just
listening?
talks about it again.
I think when you're, what I call inside out listening is when you're in
He kind of like calls back to himself, right? And I'm just thinking about this as having done this many times, but can be totally up to you. These are my opinions.
Inside out listening versus outside in listening.
I think when you're, what I call inside out listening is when you're in the mix environment, you have individual discrete control of everything. You've got a kick drum and a snare drum and a vocal and a guitar and a keyboard. And if you need the guitar louder, you just raise the guitar. If you need a guitar quieter, you lower the guitar. And your general concern is getting all the volumes of everything in relation to each other correct, and then placing them in stereo field. In mastering, I think of it as much more outside in listening. I want to step back from that. I want to sort of view the music in total. And then I may dive in, and it's much more about balancing tones. So it's much more about make sure the vocal sits right against the overall music, maybe not just against the background vocals or against the guitar or something else. It's about overall sort of sonic things, and we're not generally using levels and panning. We're generally using EQ and compression to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other aspect of it is, if I need to go back to what we were talking about, if I need to raise or lower a guitar, I have to. The other aspect of it is, if I need to raise or lower a guitar, I have to find a way to do that with EQ and compression without a fader. And there's a lot of technology out there today that will allow you to sort of not isolate, but sort of quasi-isolate things and almost remix certain portions of the song.
Right.
So in that sense, I think of it as I said, outside in listening, because I'm always referencing the whole. Anytime, even if I do dive into something and I'm trying to do something discrete or specific, I'm doing it to the whole, and by that I mean the whole mix. And I'm always referencing the whole mix. I'm always stepping back and saying, okay, how did what I do fit in with the overall sound?
Okay, did everyone follow that, what I was doing? Cool. So again, this is my opinion. So you may think I'm making choices that are different than what you would have done. That's okay. That's the fun part about being the script writer and the person making the podcast, is you have full control. It's a little different when you're just given something and you're tasked with editing it down. I made this one pink because I'm kind of unsure if I want to keep that one or not. But now that I have done this, I'm gonna just everything together. And what I don't want to do is do it on the same track, because I want to keep the whole interview intact. I don't want to lose it, right? So I'm actually gonna make another track where I'm gonna move it to. Boop. So I'm just gonna call this interviewee for the time being. And I'm gonna mute it, this one now, because I'm gonna move it. And one thing that Pro Tools does, which most DAWs do, is there's a certain mode called shuffle, so that when I start dragging the blue things down, they're gonna go to the front. Oops, I don't want to shuffle from that one though. Let's see, where do I? Yep. So I'm holding a key command to duplicate the file instead of move it away. So you'll see it'll go to the front, and then this one will just go at the end. So I'm literally slamming them together just by doing this. Oops. That's that one. Okay, that was this one.
I want to sort of view.
I just got lost for a second there. Bam. So it's doing it, we just can't see it. Bam. So now I have taken that and brought on its own track. So we also remember that he asked a question at the beginning. So I'm going to get out of this and just select everything and move it over, so that he starts speaking after the interview. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this, knowing that now that I've done this, all of my markers relate to the full interview, not what I have just done. I could make a new session and redo this, but I usually keep the full interview intact with my markers, because I may be listening to something and be like, oh, didn't he talk about this? And I can go up here and be like, okay, did he talk about this? And then find it and then bring something in. And this is kind of what I was talking about, the organization part of it. It's just like you got to be on top of the organization because it just makes things move so fast. And you don't want to be searching. Like you don't want to be searching through the interview again. Like if you want to find something that you're like, oh, I remember him saying that, but I don't remember where. Let's listen to the whole 30 minutes again. And it's like, okay, you don't want to do that if you don't have to. So let's listen to this, and I'm gonna see. There may be some like crazy, weird things happening. I don't know. I'm gonna find out, and we're gonna try to fix them. But let's see. So I'm gonna, now that this is muted, I'm just gonna make it tinier because I don't want to see it for this, and I'm gonna make this one bigger. This is the main one I'm gonna be editing.
What led you into the field of mastering?
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate.
So this is another thing that, it's kind of up to you is, I'm gonna ask for a raise of hands for this decision. Do you think that there is too much of a pause between these two things? Yes?
Started. What led you into the field of mastering?
I was working.
So raise your hand if you think it's too long of a pause. Okay, and everyone else thinks that it's not too long of a pause? I got some I think it's too long of a pause, personally. So I'm gonna select some of this negative space. Maybe like this much and move it. Oops, I gotta delete it. And put it into shuffle mode. Goodbye, space.
What led you into the field of mastering?
I was working at a Taco Bell. And
to me, that sounds natural. I like that. I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep going.
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York.
And we don't even need the unless you want to keep that,
Into the field of mastering.
I was working at.
Now that's maybe too long, right? That's too quick. So we can bring back a little bit of that, and then remove the a little bit of a fade in.
Field of mastering.
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York.
Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it.
I don't want the from the other person either. That's my personal preference. So I'm going to remove that. I was not in the right mode. And I'm collapsing things together.
A Taco Bell in upstate New York, like everybody. A friend of mine came in one night and said.
And I don't think I need from everybody.
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York. A friend of mine came in.
That's my bad.
A friend of mine came in. In upstate New York. A friend of mine came in one night and said,
Crossfade between the two. This
I
is
was
just very
working
dirty.
at a Taco Bell in upstate New York. A friend of mine came in one night and said, I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And one night and said,
okay, we don't maybe need this part.
Came in one night and said, I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And I sort of I remember very distinctly leaning down on the counter and looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you. And came out to California, got a job as a runner, gopher. I called it coffee engineer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that or the
Mm-hmm.
And caught the eye of a mastering engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't understand what he's saying in that part, like this part.
Caught the eye of a mastering engineer.
It sounds like I know what he's trying to say, which is he got coffee for a mastering engineer. So I'm gonna leave it in, but it's kind of
I called it coffee engineer, and caught the eye of a.
And I also think that that's too long of a gap.
Engineer, and caught the eye of a mastering engineer at the studio I was working at, and he said, So I can remove the double at, and this is again subjective to how you want to do your thing, but I'm removing that double at. Engineer at the studio I was working at, and he said, hey, sort of the classic hey. He said, hey, sort of the classic hey kid, you want the classic hey.
So he says here. He said,
and he said,
I can remove all this.
He said, the classic hey kid, you want a shot. And
so let me see what I'm doing here and how I'm kind of splicing this. I'm just losing my ears. I'm being instinctual about it because if it sounds really weird, if an edit I do sounds really weird, we'll be able to tell. We'll be able to tell that sounds off.
And he said, the classic hey kid, you want a shot. And that was at Sony Music Studios.
Wow.
And once I got into mastering.
And I don't want that part. I just want him to keep talking because this is going to be a short segment.
Shot, and that was at Sony Music Studios. Once I got into a mastering room and I understood what mastering was, I realized the way that I heard music really fit in really well with that.
Mm-hmm.
So mixing, sort of inside-out listening.
Yeah, maybe I don't need that.
Really well with that. Mixing, sort of inside-out listening. Mastering is much more sort of outside-in listening, and that sort of suits the way that I interpret and understand music. So what I call inside-out listening is when you're outside-in listening, and that sort of suits the way that I interpret and understand music.
So I think there should be more of a gap there, because he kind of goes into a new topic, or he kind of natural break before he starts speaking again.
that I interpret and understand music. So I'll understand music. What I call inside.
We'll have to fix that later.
Understand music. So what I call inside-out listening is when you're in that in mix and interpret and understand music. What I call inside-out listening is when you're in the mix environment. You have when you're.
So again, he says when you're twice, and we don't need to remove that, but can get really, precise about it.
Inside-out listening is when you're in the mix environment. You have individual, discrete control of everything. You've got a kick drum and a snare drum and a vocal and a guitar and a keyboard, and your general concern is getting all the volumes of everything in relation to each other correct.
Mm-hmm. So even we could even remove it just a little bit. We're working with time-based things, so usually the without slamming people with information, usually people will want to make it as concise as possible.
The volumes of everything in relation to each other correct, and then placing them in stereo field. In mastering, I think of it as much more outside-in listening. I want to step back from. I want to sort of.
So I'm just moving
stereo field. In mastering, I think of it as much more outside-in listening. I want to step back from that. I want to sort of view the music in total. I may dive in, sort of view the music in total. I may dive in, and it's much more about balancing tones. So it's much more about.
I forgot to mute that.
About balancing tones. So it's much more about make sure the vocal sits right against the make sure the vocal sits right against things. Background vocals or against the guitar or something else. Things, and we're not generally using levels and we're not generally using levels.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a tricky one, but it's okay.
Else. And we're not generally using levels and panning. We're generally using EQ and compression to do that. Mm-hmm. And the other.
I'm gonna stop. Oops. I'm gonna stop there, just so we don't have to go through the whole thing.
Do that.
To do that. That's okay. So we already kind of knocked off a bunch. We could have probably got down to here. But I mean, that's kind of how you go about it. I'm gonna listen to it. There's probably a little bit of tiny things because I did it so fast, but it's only a minute. Oops, battery's running low. I'm gonna plug it in while it's playing.
So how did you get started? What led you into the field of mastering?
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York. A friend of mine came in one night and said, I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And I sort of I remember very distinctly leaning down on the counter and looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you. And I came out to California, got a job as a runner, gopher, I called it coffee engineer, and caught the eye of a mastering engineer at the studio I was working at, and he said, the classic, hey kid, you want a shot? And that was at Sony Music Studios. Once I got into a mastering room and I understood what mastering was, I realized the way that I heard music really fit in really well with that. Mixing, sort of inside-out listening, mastering is much more sort of outside-in listening, and that sort of suits the way that I interpret and understand music. What I call inside-out listening is when you're in the mix environment, you have individual, discrete control of everything. You've got a kick drum and a snare drum and a vocal and a guitar and a keyboard, and your general concern is getting all the volumes of everything in relation to each other correct, and then placing them in stereo field. In mastering, I think of it as much more outside-in listening. I want to step back from that. I want to sort of view the music in total. I may dive in, and it's much more about balancing tones. So it's much more about make sure the vocal sits right against the overall music, maybe not just against the background vocals or against the guitar or something else. And we're not generally using levels and panning. We're generally using EQ and compression to do that.
I think it sounds pretty good, right? What do you think? So to me, it sounds natural, like a natural thing people say. And we almost cut it in half. Which is nice, and that's very important when you have an hour and a half long interview, but your podcast episodes are 20 minutes long, and you really have to be decisive of what you want to keep. And is there any questions about any about this, about what I was doing or anything? It just comes with practice. But this is how I would go about editing the dialogue. And again, this is the most important part. So learning how to do this is kind of if you're new to audio, this is your first step. I wouldn't even worry about EQ. Anything else besides just, okay, how do I get audio in? How do I cut it? How do I make the dialogue sound clean, the transitions, and everything else will come after that. One thing I want to talk about while I have this open before I go to the next session is that when I was talking about monitor versus actual level, our monitor level right now is the speakers in the room. So when I turned it up halfway through, when I'm playing and I turn it down.
What led you into the field of mastering?
I'm changing the monitor level.
A friend of mine
the level within Pro Tools is the exact same. I have not touched Pro Tools.
And I sort of I'm very distinctly
but if I do
leaning down
this,
on the counter and looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying,
and I'm like, wow, that's too loud. And then I turn down my track here.
Very distinctly leaning
And
down
it's too loud.
on the counter, or looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you. And came out
So
to
that seems like a more natural level, but what I've just done is just lowered the volume in the session, and you can see this is like my master meter.
very distinctly leaning.
It should be way up here, but
Very
look how
distinctly
low it
leaning
is.
down.
It's so low, and if I were to render this and put it on Spotify or something, Spotify like normalizes things. If I were to put it on SoundCloud, it would be so quiet compared to everybody else's. But to us, in this room, it sounds like it's a nice level, but really it's not. It's an illusion. So what you really want to do is, I'm turning the speakers down in here. What you really want to do is get a good level in the session.
Very
So
distinctly
here.
leaning down on them.
That's
on
a
the
pretty good
counter,
level.
Looking at one
That's
end of the
decent.
counter, looking at
It's almost hitting the top. It's not clipping. If I were to push it up a lot, you'll see
very distinctly leaning.
it turns red, and that's clipping. We don't want that. And now I'm going to set my speakers to this level. I'm going to not touch Pro Tools. I'm going to turn my speakers up until I feel like it's good.
Very distinctly leaning down on the counter, or looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with
Cool.
you. And came out to California, got a job as a runner, gopher. I called it.
Does that make sense? Awesome. And we're talking about like EQ, and I'll just give an example of how you can shape a sound with EQ. So this is an EQ. It's going to show me the frequency content of the voice, and I can
Very distinctly leaning down on the counter, or looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter.
I can
saying,
choose if I want to
And came out to California,
boost things
got a
or remove
job as a,
things or stuff like
runner,
that.
gopher.
So if I remove like half the frequencies, you'll hear it.
Very distinctly leaning
Right.
down on the counter.
So you can see,
looking
you
at
can
one
hear
end
what
of
it's
the counter,
doing.
Looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you. And came out to California, got a job as a.
So maybe I think it's a little bit too intense at this low, like 120 hertz.
Very distinctly leaning down on the counter,
I'm gonna turn
looking
off.
at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying,
Turn back
I'm gonna
on.
go with you. And came out to California, got a job.
Did everyone hear that? I kind of just removed a little bit of the lows just to make it sound more smooth, in my opinion. I also think it's a little bit here, and maybe I could increase the highs a little bit.
Very distinctly leaning down on the counter, looking at one end of
So
the
I'm gonna turn
counter,
it
looking
off?
at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you. And came out
Turn
to
it back on.
California, got a job as a runner, gopher.
It's very subtle,
I called it call.
but it's nice. Another thing that I would say is super common to use is a de-esser, which is a type of compression which removes the S's. There's not many S's in this because of how it was recorded, but
Distinctly leaning down.
so like that distinctly.
Very distinctly leaning down on.
See how I kind of remove that like S sound? So I'll turn it off,
Very distinctly leaning down on.
turn it back on.
Very distinctly leaning down on.
Kind of just like smooths out the S's. And these are so the EQ and the de-essers are like really common to have on all of your dialogue tracks generally, especially if they're being recorded on the same mic the whole time. Cool. So I'm just trying to introduce these things so you could look them up later and learn more about them. But I just want people to know that they exist and that these are things that people use. I'll save it when editing. So now I'll show you a full-fledged session, just like a tour, and then that'll be it. I'll have questions if you have questions. So this is a podcast that I was the lead sound designer and sound design supervisor on. I was also the recording engineer for all the recording sessions. I was the composer for the music as well, and I also created all the sounds. I was it's like a podcast about an AI dating app, basically. So it's fictional, but I had to create a soundscape for the AI, so I did all that. So we will see. Oops. So these are my three voices.
Side. We're on air quality lockdown
Right,
until we
so
get
they're
some
all on their
wind
own
blowing
tracks.
through this area. Too much stank in the air.
Do you like to go outside?
So. I'm a bit of a tech head, actually.
And then just to show the AI voice.
Now, please note, in this trial version, Iris may pop in to enhance your session or...
So I'm using a bunch of plugins, but we're just trying to show you the tour. And then everything else is sound effects. This is, let's see what this is, wind noise. Oh, wind noise because the person's outside. So this is like some ambience, right? So I'll just play a little bit of it all together so we can listen to it.
Julian, we have found your ideal match on Iris. You are user A. In this trial version, you must connect immediately.
So I'm gonna
enhance. To unlock this feature?
No.
Okay, connecting you now. Please note, in this trial version, Iris
So there's
may
wind
pop
noise.
in to enhance your
He's about to make a
session
phone call.
or
There's gonna
moderate
be
your
a ringtone.
conversation in order to give you the full
She's gonna pick
experience
up.
of a
There's some
connection
automation. You'll
on
hear it.
Iris.
ringtone.
Hello? Is anybody there?
Oh shit, sorry. I thought it would work on speaker, but this thing really wants you to hold the damn phone up to your ear.
Oh, hello.
Hi, what's up?
Not much.
So she didn't have the phone up. It was on speaker, it wasn't working. She had to pick it up, so I did some automation. And I just wanted to show you this because it can get as deep as you want it to be. You can have a podcast that has no sound effects or no music and just interviews, kind of like the NPR one was just more spoken. Or you can like go crazy and have a bunch of sound effects. She's on a keyboard, so there's typing. I don't know, see, is this it?
Personify them.
Yeah, so like this typing sound. And in the context, they're talking and she's typing.
A hardware tech right now.
I was a botanist.
Sounds mighty more impressive. No idea what it means.
It's nothing.
Iris, what's a botanist?
A botanist is someone who studies plants.
So that was a sound that she called on the app, and the app listens. So that was like a sound to be like, hey, the app is listening. And all of these sounds are just sounds that are trying to convey something to the listener because there's no visual. So everything that you want the listener to like kind of understand about the space you're setting or what you're like trying to like get across, you can use with sound. So the typing kind of acts as, she's a computer programmer, so it helps with that. But it also comes in the story where she is not very interested at the beginning, and it makes it very clear that she's not paying full attention to him on the phone. So these are just things to think about as a sound designer, or when you're writing a podcast. But if there's no other questions, that's kind of all I have. Are there any questions? Yes?
What's the name of that podcast?
This podcast is called Oracle. It has a website. Let's see if I can get to it. It's called oraclethepodcast.com. Let's see. And actually, the second, there's I think 4 episodes in the first season. And the second season is being recorded right now. So if you're interested, it is about an AI dating app. There's 4 episodes. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, that's a very important question. There is a reason I did that. The main reason is that if I put all of them on the same track and I wanted to affect one of them, it would be a lot harder to affect that single one without affecting the rest of them on the track too. So I put them all on their own track so that if I want to do like EQ or compression, or if I want to like add reverb, I know that when I'm doing it, it's only applying to that single sound effect. In really big sessions, like the sessions that have like 100 tracks, I will put things on the same thing if I know that there's no processing going to be done to them, because then it doesn't matter. But it matters a lot if you're going to do like EQ or reverb or like if you want to make something sound distorted, like someone's talking on a phone and you like want to make it sound like they're coming from a phone. You wouldn't want to do that on the same track that the rest of the dialogue is on. You'd want to move it to its own track. Any other questions? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like we're being recorded on different microphones and stuff like that. You're talking about, right? Yeah. So a lot of times you can try to get it to sound as much as possible the same, but I wouldn't degrade the quality of the good mic to try to fit the bad mic. Do you know what I mean? Because in podcasts, it's okay. In film, you would do that. You would like make the good audio sound worse. But in podcasts, it's okay because we kind of know that people interview over virtually now, and we kind of can suspend our disbelief that it's like okay, that this person's like on a Zoom call or something, and then we know that and we don't care. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that. And there are so many Zoom podcasts. Another thing that if you're going to be like if you're planning on doing a podcast is there is something in radio and I guess podcasts called a tape sync, where you actually like each interview person has an engineer with them that are recording them with good mics. Like say they have a Zoom call, and they're talking to each other. They're also recording with good mics, and then you use the good mics to sync up later. And that's very common in the podcast world, at least nowadays. Yeah. Yep.
One thing I had a question about is I was wondering if you knew of any like good resources for like sounds or like best like recording practices for people who are just starting out maybe not have access to great.
Totally, yeah. I mean, in terms of like finding sounds that are free, free sound is like the best, in my opinion. There are a lot of really bad sounds on there as well, because it's just like anyone can upload the sounds. Like I could just like record the sound of me going like this and upload it, and then people could download it. But there's so many sounds. There is actually whenever you send out the email, I'll include some resources. But there is a BBC just recently released like thousands of their sounds that you can download. You can't use them for commercial use, but they're archived sounds of like animals and ambiances and cars and everything. And there's like thousands and thousands of them, and they're really good. And I've used some of them before in my stuff, and it's amazing. That's a good resource. In terms of recording practice, honestly, YouTube is probably going to be your best bet, and then doing it as well. Microphones do. For the basis of microphones, which I'll say is that each microphone has a thing called a polar pattern, and the polar pattern is essentially like how much of the sound gets picked up as you move off axis of the mic. So for example, this mic on my chest has a cardioid polar pattern, so it's picking up sound coming this way and trying to not pick up sound that's coming from like the ground or whatever else, which is good in live sound because we don't want the speakers to be picked up by this mic too. So it's nice to be pointed at my face. And you can think about this idea kind of like how we see, like, you know, like in our eyes, we have the fovea or whatever, where it's like if I look straight at you, that's the clearest image. And as things in my view go to the side, they become more blurry. That's how mics work too. As the sounds move off the center of the axis, they become blurry essentially, and they don't sound as good. I actually just recently was helping somebody, and they had a microphone that kind of looks like those handheld microphones, but it wasn't. And their minds were blown when I told them they were talking to the wrong side of the mic, pretty much. And as soon as they learned that, their recording quality went from like -10 to 100 in terms of quality. So just looking at like the mic, and all of these resources, if you buy a microphone, are available in the manual of the mic, of like how it works and the frequency response and everything like that. But really just like being close, pointing it at the thing you want to record, trying to be weary of your surroundings. A lot of people record podcasts in their closet under a blanket, and it sounds gruff, on their phone, and it sounds fine. But there's a lot of resources on YouTube. There's also some books, recording, like best recording practices books if you like reading. I like reading, so. But they're very technical, so just be aware of that. But the best learning is doing it and listening to it and understanding how you either made mistakes or make good choices. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. Do you want to say some more things, Arionne?
Yeah, no, just thank you so much. And we will make sure that we email out all of this, plus any other references that we think of that could be helpful. So thank you so much for coming out. And also, we are planning to do more workshops for anybody that's interested. So please, feel free to ask me anything if there's something that you really want to know, or other workshops, audio workshops that you want. Please let me know and get it on my radar. Thank you so much.
Yes. I have one more thing to say, an anecdote that relates to the recording question that I just thought of. Is I met one of the sound designers for Star Wars, and he told me that one of the most important sounds in Star Wars, like Rogue One, he recorded with his cell phone. So that's just a thing to say that cell phones are good enough to record. You don't need the best quality. It's all in the content. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.